Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Daniela Osatsky-Stern, and I am extremely honored to open this virtual event organized by the Holocaust Studies Program at Western Galilee College in Akko, Israel, and Children of War, Holocaust, and Genocide. In recent years, research of the fate of children during the Holocaust had been brought to the front of scholars' attention. Today, we broaden the scope of conversation to include present cases of child atrocities around the world. And specifically, we will focus on challenges of reception and rehabilitation of children who survived traumas of violence. This is a painful and sensitive topic for all of us, but incredibly important and unfortunately still relevant to many societies. I would like to express my deep appreciation to all of you, my colleagues, who took the courage to dwell into it. And we will hear from all of you soon. This event was initiated and organized by Dr. Verena from the University of Applied Sciences in Potsdam, and Dr. Beth Cohen, head of the Holocaust Studies program at Western Galilee College. Dr. Verena areas of research include childhood during the Holocaust, displaced children after World War II, history of social work, and Jewish functionaries in camps. She received several awards and prizes for her various works. Additionally, Dr. Busser was part of a research group at Potsdam University, which conducted a study for the Ministry of Education on the life situation of refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and Africa. Dr. Boaz Cohen's research focuses on the development of Holocaust memory and historiography in social and cultural contexts, and on Jewish and Israeli post-Holocaust society. His current research examines work with survivor children after the Holocaust, their rehabilitation, and the collection of their testimonies. He is the author of many books and articles, including Israeli Holocaust Research, Birth and Evolution, Survivor, Caregivers, and Child Survivors, and Microhistory of Israeli Holocaust Research. We are looking forward to a fascinating event, and I see we have also some Holocaust survivors with us. We are honored to have you. Some technical notes: we are recording the sessions and we will upload them to our website, and please keep your microphones on mute. If you have any questions for our panelists, please write them down on the chat. As always, I want to thank Dr. Boaz Cohen, Dr. Ronnie Mikel Arieli, Jan Buzlaf, and Dr. Yaron Pasher from the organizing team. Verena, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Daniela, for the introduction, and thank you also for your very extremely helpful support for this event. And yes, I would like to welcome all of you. I see we are 65 people at the moment. And I would like to give you a short introduction to this fifth workshop on child survivors and the children of the Holocaust, War and Genocide project. We started in 2017. Some of you were already among us in London, Potsdam, or in Berlin during the last years, and it's nice to see you and welcome you here today again. So I would like to tell you a little bit how I came to the subject and a very short introduction what we will hear about today. And now I try to share my desktop with you. Do you see it? No, not yet.
No, it's starting.
Ah, yes. Okay. So, so when I no, sorry. So when I finished my PhD in 2009, 2010 about children who survived concentration camps, for example, Sachsenhausen, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen, I came naturally to the point where I was asking what happened to these children after the Holocaust. How many were them? How did the caretakers work with them? And so I started some years ago to work with the files of the International Tracing Service in Bad Arolsen and started to work with the files of the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, which then was not that well known as today. Thanks to the opening of the archives, many researchers of all over the world are now have access to these documents. So, and I was fascinated that there in the Arolsen archives, there are at least 66,000 personal individual case files of children, forced laborer children, Jewish children, and all these children who were defined as displaced. Of course, there were many more. I think researchers estimate at least 200,000 all over Europe. So, and what is the question now? Today we are speaking of the reception of these children who survived the Holocaust, genocide, forced labor, torture, loss of families, and so on. And I think when it comes to the question of reception of children and teenagers, we are also are confronted with the challenge and the question of how do these children respond to war, genocide, and the Holocaust. So some years ago, I found a large file in these archives where this is a full description, not full, of course, but a broad picture how these children reacted, and the reactions, of course, are a heavy challenge to those caretakers from then. So, yeah. And for example, I quoted a little bit from the files. This is not everything which was written down about these children, of course, but one of the most touching things was that they had a lack of safe, steady, and dependable background, because as you all of you know, that last years after the persecution started, they were confronted with massive trauma of losing family. They were witnesses of atrocities, mass shootings, hiding, everyday fear of being murdered. And what was also a problem that not only those children who lost their parents, whose parents were murdered or persecuted or deported, what was the thing that I had that yesterday I spoke with a child survivor from Bergen-Belsen, and he told me, for example, that it was a massive problem, for example, the state of the mind of his parents, because they had been very strong in the years before liberation. And then, for example, he told me that his mother had a background and was not a reliable person, in the sense that she had not the strength anymore to care for him. This is only one example. And of course, the children, we will hear it later in the lecture also of Father Desbois, which we had to record in the morning because he is in a flight at the moment, children were distrustful and regarded especially adults as their enemies, because they were either the perpetrators or they had the feeling of the parents were not there for them, even if they tried so and so on. Yeah. And of course, the caretakers from the different aid organizations, not only the UNRWA, United Nations aid organization, but also the Joint, the Jewish Relief Unit, aid agencies from Poland or other countries, they had to see that these children were full of rage, violent behavior, and they did not behave like children anymore. And Boaz worked also on this issue of how important is it to offer these child survivors food or bread. And we found in several reports that they had difficulties in regulating the amount of food. And it was said these children, we know it from the famous example of the children with whom Anna Freud worked, that they were said to have a conspicuous sexual behavior. So to come to full circle, I hope you can see it. I don't see nothing. Do you see anything? No, I don't know why. Sorry. Okay. So what was new then? Because when we speak about children and relevance from the past and relevance of the past for today's child survivors of atrocities, civil wars, or genocide. So what was new? The caretakers worked with child-centered rehabilitation efforts. They took into regard cultural aspects. For example, transit centers were opened according to the nationality of the children. Started to have daily activities in the centers, also, for example, in the liberated Belsen camp, offered education and schooling. In many Zionist-run Hachsharot, there were teenagers who had to start, or who were offered to start a pre-occupational training. And what was interesting, we have it in some cases already in Berlin, that they recruit staff among those displaced persons then, and we have it today also that we have some organizations, for example, I know the case from Berlin, that they recruit staff among Syrian refugees. So this was only a small introduction. Thank you for listening. I stop the presentation, PowerPoint now. So you see me again. And now I would like to introduce to you our first speaker. We changed a little bit schedule of speakers. Now I would like to introduce to you Dr. Beth Cohen. Beth, she received her PhD from Clark University, from the Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and a master degree from Harvard University. Her first book is called Case Closed, and it deals with the reception of adult survivors in the United States. And her latest book, it's about, and this is why we also invited her today, about child survivors of the Holocaust, youngest remnant, and the American experience. And this is very interesting because it analyzes the encounter of child survivors with the American society then. And moreover, Beth is a lecturer at California State University, Northridge. And currently she is researching intersection of gender and grief among survivors. And please, Beth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, everybody can see that? Yeah, okay, great. All right, first of all, thank you to Dr. Verena Booster and to Dr. Boaz Cohen and to Dahlia for this wonderful conference. It's an honor to be here with my co-presenters. And I also want to acknowledge the child survivors who have spoken to me and shared their stories. It's their voices that animate and give meaning to my work. I also just want to mention, Verena, your introduction was a wonderful way of setting the stage for what I'm going to talk about, because I am not going to give the backstories to the children. So please bear in mind what Verena talked about as I speak. Okay. Let's see. War Orphans Find Home, announced the Decatur Review. Above the caption, a photo depicts two beaming youngsters destined for their U.S. relatives. The 1947 article declares, quote, "The fondest dreams of a million war orphans are today coming true for Mary and Alfred." The sibling story is one of many in the post-war press to capture child survivors' arrivals. Newspapers in every corner of the country featured them in promising terms. The youngest survivors of Hitlerism finding contentment in the embrace of an American family, eager to start life anew. These initial welcomes suggested happy endings to the children's wartime miseries. Mary and Alfred went to their new family, but of course their story did not end there. What happened once the glare of the media faded? Using newspaper accounts as a starting point, combined with the children's later oral testimonies and additional archival records, I scrutinized surviving orphans' encounters with their new US families and the fraught process of reception and resettlement in America. Soon after the conclusion of World War II, World Jewry confronted the staggering death toll of children. In efforts to assist the tiny remnant of young survivors, fundraising campaigns brought images of child survivors into the US public eye, triggering interest in war orphans by American Jews. Letters quickly reached the offices of Jewish agencies. Quote, "My wife and I wish to adopt 2 refugee children," stated one man. "We'd like a boy of 3 and a girl of 2, he added. Similarly, "We are writing to you in regards to adopting a baby," a woman wrote. "We would appreciate it if you would let us know immediately as to what steps we are to take in order to turn our cherished dream into a reality." The inquiries by prospective parents illuminate the interest in orphans, specifically babies and toddlers, by American Jews. While some may have been altruistically inclined towards providing a home to a war orphan, this was tied to very practical issues. In the late 1940s and early 50s, healthy Jewish infants, the preferred choice for adoptions, were rarely available. And adoption issues of the day stressed matching, that is, selecting a baby that most resembled the potential parents. If these options were unavailable, a baby from one's own ethnic or religious community, although second best, might provide the answer to their prayers. But as families would learn, there were few babies or toddlers to be had. In addition, initial restrictions on immigration also undermined adoption hopes. This changed, however, with the Truman Directive that allowed 3,000 orphans to enter the United States beginning in 1946. With the impending arrival of orphans, the Wartime European Jewish Children's Aid, the EJCA, was reactivated. The EJCA coordinated the orphans' placements with both the U.S. Committee for the Care of European Children Abroad and with local Jewish communal agencies in the states, who were then required to submit semi-annual reports to the EJCA based on social workers' home visits. These records illuminate the first face-to-face encounters between orphans and their new families. One critical point that emerges is that initially most orphans went to their US relatives, as indicated by the Truman legislation. Part of the logic behind this was that kinship would automatically provide emotional connection, but the evidence suggests otherwise. In fact, a recurring thorny issue was that of placements. Children commonly had not one, but multiple placements, many problematic. According to a 1950 Boston study of 28 adolescents first year, all but 4 experienced 2 changes within a few months. 11 had 3 placements, 3 children went to 4 homes, and 1 boy lived in 5 different homes in his first year. An EJCA field worker notes, with these failures, the youngsters have lost resources for emotional as well as financial support. Survivors' testimonies support these early reports. The experiences of Mary, the girl in this photo, also echoes these findings. And I'm focusing on Mary because I was able to interview her and not her brother. The Schlossers, their sponsors, already parents of a 2-year-old son, emphasized their generous determination to give the siblings every opportunity they possibly could for successful lives. Unfortunately, Mary's stay there was over in a matter of months. Nearly 50 years later, Mary reflects on her beginnings that so vastly differed from the newspaper account. Though the Schlossers professed commitment, Mary said, "My aunt didn't have the time, nor did my uncle. Perhaps they didn't have the desire," she suggests. Less than a year after their arrival, the Schlossers shipped Mary to an aunt and uncle in Detroit. Mary hoped the second family would give her the attention she craved, but they soon reneged as well. Basically, I was alone, and even though I had people, I didn't feel accepted, which, she adds, was a pattern throughout my life. Before long, she was living in another foster home. Then a family took her in so that Mary could care for their 3 children. By the time she graduated from high school, 7 years after her heralded arrival in Illinois, she had had 4 different placements and was adopted by none. Nobody, Mary states flatly, wanted an orphan. Let's see, I want to go to the next slide. Here we go. French sisters Ruth on the left and Leah, 13 and 14 years old, was shuffled around too. The pair arrived in New York in 1946. A photographer caught the girls swept up in their grandfather's embrace, although he quickly deposited them with his son and daughter-in-law. Leah sensed the couple's main interest in the orphans was due to financial benefit. And in fact, Jewish agencies did give families allowances for foster children. The girls were given strict orders: do not enter the living room, take food from the kitchen, or speak French in their aunt's presence. Ruth also felt much animosity from her American cousin, who was of similar age. After 2 years, the aunt notified the Jewish Child Care Association that she no longer wanted her nieces. The 2 were sent first to a Jewish orphanage in Texas, and then each to a series of foster homes, a painful separation for the siblings. A 1949 article entitled "Adjustment of Immigrant Children in the US" by E. Hirsch finds similar outcomes. Hirsch studied the first 6 months of 316 youngsters like the Krell sisters who were brought to the United States from France. Hirsch observes consistent patterns such as children's initial excitement, followed by ambivalence and disillusionment with their relatives' behavior toward them and their kin's inability to understand them. Hirsch and others recommend better preparation with foster families before the children's arrival in order to avoid problems, noting that despite best efforts, the results are often dismal. Alas, better or any preparation seems to have been missing from the process. Not all efforts, of course, were failures. There are some who describe their families positively, such as Irene Hisme, the little girl in the photo here. Irene, a twin, an Auschwitz survivor of Mengele's torture, here she is as an 8-year-old girl brought to New York to raise money for the agency Rescue Children. After a whirlwind PR tour, including this photo spread in Life magazine and quite a few others, a family showed interest in adopting her. It came to naught. After a weekend, they determined that Irene was too subdued. She was secretly pleased. She'd been staying with a rescue children rabbi and his wife and hoped they would adopt her. Instead, on a snowy day, the couple deposited the girl with another family. Irene was bereft. Still, she grew to love her new parents, stating they unfailingly stood by her. Eventually, too, as a result of the Life magazine article, they learned her brother, Rene, her twin brother, was alive in Czechoslovakia and went to great lengths to bring him to New York. Irene describes a relatively stable childhood with her family, in part, she believes, because her wartime experiences taught her to be a quiet, uncomplaining child. The majority of orphans went to private homes, either to relatives like Mary or to those who were not related like Irene. But there are times when the foster family placement proved untenable and Jewish agencies sought alternatives. Numerous child survivors recall a variety of other settings, from orphanages to homes for troubled juveniles. The children's experiences in these environments varied. Some have positive memories, while others are dire. Julie Kiefer's story speaks to this. This photo depicts her in a group of children. It's hard to see her, she's in the back, who arrived together in 1948 on the SS Omer Bradley. By the time she reached the US at age 7, she'd endured the Lvov ghetto, a bunker, hiding with a Polish rescuer, and 3 DP camps. She remembers during this initial time in New York that, quote, "I was very, very sad." Though her Aunt Siegel sponsored her, she ended up with different relatives who were not pleased with Julie's arrival. Aunt Helen's first gesture to her niece, the latter remembers vividly, was to cut off her hair, since Helen assumed erroneously that the child had lice. Julie recollects overhearing her aunt refer to her as that brat, as well as numerous other instances of her aunt's cruel behavior. After some months, Julie recalls the first visit by a social worker. Aunt Helen warned her niece to tell the woman how happy she was. Julie complied. By the social worker's second visit, the child bravely decided to tell the truth. She reported that she hated the home, that she was mistreated, describing how her aunt left Julie's meals on the floor outside of her bedroom. Soon the social worker returned and told Julie, quote, "We're going to send you to the country where you'll see chickens and cows and other children." Before long, Julie was en route to Cleveland and the Belfair Home for Orphan Children. She spent the next 7 years there. For Julie, this turn of events was fortuitous. After Julie refused to speak to a series of social workers, the institution's director referred her to a psychoanalyst in Cleveland. The woman's unswerving presence and commitment to Julie's treatment were critical to her emotional stability. But her displacement didn't end. She also spent time with 2 foster families. Finally, at the age of 14, Julie was adopted by a family who she describes as wonderful. Despite the fact that Julie spent a significant part of her childhood at Belfair and never saw the alleged chickens and cows, she's not bitter. On the contrary, she believes it saved her. But numerous other accounts describe their stay at Belfair with unhappiness. Some felt tricked into going there. Others described loneliness and abuse. But unquestionably for Julie, it was far preferable to her relative's home. In the course of my research, I discovered one remarkable effort by the Jewish Family and Children's Services in Boston that stands out for its novel approach to orphan survivors. Based on the difficulties their clients experience with foster family placements, its director, Dr. Beatrice Carter, proposed that a group setting might be a more effective alternative. In the summer of 1946, the agency launched its first trial, a New Americans unit for orphans at Camp Kingswood, an existing Jewish summer camp in Maine. All manners of activities were offered to these campers, from English classes to individual tutorials to creative expression. The camp, remarked one social worker, quote, became a place where the children could be helped in working through their emotional tensions. One notable summer event, and here this is what you see in the photograph, was a play that the teens produced based on their wartime experiences, wrote one boy in the camp magazine, Twice Born. We resolved to face once more the reality that had been. During rehearsals, we lived only partly in the present. Some of us sang the songs of the concentration camps, and some sang the Nazi songs that we so often had heard and hated. Then that Friday night came. We were deeply steeped into the past and played from our hearts. People were impressed. We were asked to perform in other camps. That we could not do. But in some way, we are freer now to live for the future, end quote. When the summer ended, the agency created a residential home in Boston for the youths that replicated the camp's child center approach. Leonard Serkis, a social worker at the camp and home, states that the program succeeded because of strong progressive leadership and devotion to the children, combined with professional expertise. But was this view of success shared by the children as well? Apparently so. Barbara S., and Barbara is the girl here sitting in the front in the white blouse and dark skirt, remembers the camp and home clearly. A 16-year-old Auschwitz survivor, she came to New York in 1947. Because her uncle declined to keep her, Barbara was sent to Boston. She recalls this period warmly, stating with other orphans living together, it was like a family. Carter was not Jewish, Barbara notes, but she insisted on keeping the group home kosher to provide the teens with a connection to their roots. The program also fostered the youngsters' autonomy, for example, by giving each an allowance. Barbara marvels that, quote, Mrs. Carter never criticized me, never told me how to spend the money. Moreover, Carter listened to and supported Barbara's educational goals. Robert Berger, another orphan who became a cardiologist, remembers Carter's philosophy, quote, she frequently expressed her view that each one of us had a nugget of gold hidden inside, and it was the task of the staff at JF&CS to dig for that nugget, bring it to the surface, and to let it grow and glow. In conclusion, the US reception of survivor orphans was enormously complicated. While many Americans initially received the youngsters with open arms, this warmth was often short-lived. Records capture mutual disappointments and rejections, a dramatic contrast to the optimistic media accounts. Why? There are many likely reasons and none satisfying. Possibly adoptive parents who expected a perfect match were disappointed by what they perceived as irreconcilable differences. Conceivably, some were insensitive or too ill-equipped to deal with traumatized children. Others thought the youngsters would quickly forget their recent experiences. Child survivors themselves were ambivalent about becoming attached to new parents and expressed profound feelings of loneliness in the midst of new family groups. In other instances, the orphan's presence upset the biological family's equilibrium. Even well-intentioned social workers were sometimes stymied to the point of paralysis. Still, at least one agency's efforts succeeded in helping children. And there were adoptive and foster parents who nurtured their charges unconditionally. These children felt welcomed and loved. But often new parents' interest waned, disappeared, or hardened into antipathy, which made a travesty of the hopeful beginnings imagined by children and adults alike. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your inspiring lecture, Beth. We will now switch from the United States, from the past to Berlin in the present, or to Germany in the present. And I have the pleasure now, where is he? Ah, there. To introduce to you Mr. Günter Jeck, who is the head of the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany, today in Berlin, of the Berlin office, and he's a diploma social worker and a social business economist. His main areas in his work are the topics of migration or social protection systems, and in this function he is also in several committees for the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany, and so I lost my English now. I try to, parallel to this, I try to translate from German into English, but with some English words, it does not work at all. So sorry for this.
Try German, some people will understand it.
So he's in several committees for the Zentralwohlfahrtsstelle, it's the German term. Before he was working for the Central Welfare Board, he was the head of the social department of the Jewish community in Düsseldorf. And so, Mr. Jeck, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I feel really honored being given the opportunity to talk about our work to such a high-ranked scientific audience. And I'm happy to see some of you again. We met in Potsdam last year. And I'm happy to see you well and healthy during just another world crisis. So my introduction to the work with traumatized children and young adults in past and present benefited from an essay called The ZWST Youth Work as an Incubator for Jewish Life in Post-War Germany by my colleague Laura Casses, written more than 3 years ago when ZWST celebrated its 100th birthday. Laura collected a wonderful compilation of quotations from former ZWST youth workers, which I'm looting shamelessly for my contribution today. So let's take a look at ZWST's early years. The ZWST was founded in 1917 with the aim of organizing and coordinating the fragmented Jewish welfare work in Germany in a centralized manner. It set itself the task of aligning Jewish social welfare with the Jewish model of charity, the Tzedakah, and at the same time helping to shape the modern German welfare state of the Weimar Republic. In the field of youth care and the promotion of the youth movement, the main goal of the ZWST was to encourage the youth to carry out these tasks under their own responsibility. Therefore, in 1924, ZWST set up a Reichskomitee of the Jewish Youth Associations, which almost all of the larger youth associations soon joined, initially in loose contact with one another and with the ZWST. In 1926 and 1927, the independent Reichskomitee, under the leadership of Cora Berliner, developed into its own organization, but remained in close contact with the ZWST and functioned as its youth council. In addition, the ZWST took on the role of Jewish career counseling for young people, and in some cases also prepared them for emigration to Palestine, which played an increasingly important role in the climate of increasing anti-Semitism in Germany. The ZWST was shut down step by step by the National Socialists and finally smashed in 1939. The ZWST's employees and volunteers tried to alleviate the suffering of the remaining Jews until their own deportation in 1943. Among the last ones to be deported was Leo Beck. He formulated their efforts as to work until the last minyan. In post-war Germany, the ZWST was brought back to life in 1951 by the Central Council of Jews, also refunded after the Shoah. The situation initially only served to alleviate urgent needs and was marked by uprooting, trauma, and a small spirit of optimism. Most of the Jewish people who were stranded in Germany after their survival, escape, and exile saw the Allied occupation zones only as a stopover for their further immigration. At the same time as the situation in the DP camps, the first community structures developed primarily through German Jews who had survived and returned and wanted to start over. Initially managed as a one-man business by Berthold Simonson as a managing director. A youth department was set up in 1955 when the office moved to Frankfurt. Berthold Simonson wrote, "Children on Vacation." A holiday recreation program for children was carried out for the first time after the war. Jewish children in Europe, from Simonson's point of view, should have the opportunity to spend a few weeks in a Jewish environment every year. The ZWST could acquire a house with an area of 55 square meters located in Wembach in the southern Black Forest that could accommodate 100 children for a 4-week cure period. It was inaugurated on July the 1st, 1956, and the next day the first children moved in. In October 1955, the newly established position of a youth officer was filled with Harry Maor for the first time after the war. He published a magazine for children and one for adolescents. In the paper Jüdische Jugend, which first appeared in January 56, Harry Maor addressed the young people in the Jewish communities in the very personal form of a letter, which I would like to quote. "Dear friend, you are the generation after the tragedy of our people. We now need youth again, and we know that a new Jewish youth wants to get to work. The older generation of the Jewish people needs your young strength without being able to promise or give you much in return. The fruits that she once ripened for you in Germany have fallen without you being able to pick them. You must be clear about this. You will not find what you are looking for all at once, but slowly and late. Your task is difficult and there are many concerns. Is that why you want to stand aside? Do not make hasty vows and do not design intelligent programs. You should be strong and bear the sign in your heart that unmistakably points you in the only direction, to Judaism. The Jewish youth in Germany belongs together. It should no longer be separated from Jewish youth around the world. These sheets, which will now appear monthly, want to pave the way for this knowledge. Long live the Jewish youth." Harry Maor organized seminars on questions of Jewish identity in post-war Germany, on Zionism and Jewish culture. He also ran holiday camps for Jewish children and advanced training seminars for youth group leaders. The Jewish life in Israel had to serve as a role model. A close connection with Israel was therefore an educational necessity. Simonson wrote that Jewish children, like other children, are influenced by social change and media overload, but their parents suffered the aftermath of the persecution, which had an immediate impact on their upbringing. He wrote, "Because they are the generation who, even in their youth, were torn out of normal life, driven from their home and familiar surroundings, dragged through concentration and work camps, were not allowed to complete their education and training, and mostly lost their parents themselves. Added to this are the difficulties of reintegration, the language, the psychological inhibitions towards an environment to which one blames everything that has hit you. In addition, the parents would have too little time for their children in an effort to regain what was lost too quickly." David Blumenthal, a longtime youth worker of ZWST, wrote in 2017 on the occasion of the association's celebrations for the centenary, "I remember that the kids in the 50s and 60s were different from the kids today. They were much harder to deal with in many ways. They came from completely different backgrounds and their behavior reflected this. One group were the children of the survivors, many of them from Eastern European countries, who had been liberated from the camps and who were then known as displaced persons, DPs. They still carried the Städtel mentality with them. They spoke Yiddish to each other. These children came from houses in which they were told that Germany was only a stopover until they could get a visa to the USA or Canada. They did not want to approach German society in any way and also found it difficult to find their way into the youth groups. The other groups were children of Israelis who had returned to Germany after the war and who found it difficult to cope with the environment in post-war Germany. We had to encourage all these children to get involved in this new community and, step by step, take away their insecurities and mistrust. In the end, many of the children found a second home in the camps and in the local youth centers run by Israelis, as in my case, in Düsseldorf. The Jews in Germany were looked down on other Jews, on other Jewish communities around the world. People couldn't understand how Jews could still live in this country after all that had happened. And but today, almost 60 years later, I realize how rough the ground was in which we planted the seeds for new Jewish life, he wrote. ZVST's efforts in relieving traumatized children are, as you have heard, based on a tradition, partially on self-experience. There are obvious parallels between the traumatized children then and now. Our organization contributed to a renaissance of Jewish life in Germany through the relief of traumata, community building, and claiming a place in a diverse society. How and where we are contributing now in the work with actual refugees, traumatized children, will be reported later on by my valued colleague from Israel. Thank you for your audience.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Jeck, for letting us know about the history of the ZVST and its work with children and child survivors. So our next speaker mentioned it in the introduction. We had to record the lecture or the talk today in the morning at 7 o'clock because Father Desbois is on a flight at the moment. And yes, I think we can start the recording. And then
Daniela, you place the record, you open the recording, okay?
Okay, let me know if it works.
If not, I have it here on my desktop. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So I have the honor now to introduce to you Father Patrick Desbois, who's the president of the international organization Yahad in Unum. And this organization is working since the last 15 years in interviewing more than 7,000 eyewitnesses of the execution of Jews and Romas in Eastern Europe. So what I learned from that is that you also live in the power of speaking about the atrocities. And Father Desbois was also from 2001 until 2016 the director of the National Service for Relations with Judaism. I think probably all of the people who are here today know your book about the Holocaust by the bullets, a priest's journey to uncover the truth behind the murder of 1 million Jews, which was published in 2007, I think, and won the National Jewish Book Award in 2008. So we are here today as we speak about bridging the past and the present, and we want to speak today about your organization, Action Yazidis, the initiative that collects the words of survivors and also of children to document and offer evidence of every step of the genocide of the Yazidi committed by ISIS. So thank you that you are here today. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, with my organization, Yahad, since now nearly 20 years, effectively, we have investigated the crimes committed against the Jews and Roma in post-Soviet Union. We work in 10 countries, and in my second book, In Broad Daylight, I try to explain what was the protocol, the processes, so that the German came very early in a village at 6 o'clock and most of the time leave at 5 p.m. and all the Jews are dead except in Babi Yar and places like that. And it was for me a big enigma. It took me 2 years to understand Finally, how many people we employed, little people, to dig the mass grave, to fulfill the mass grave, to take out the clothes, to sell the belonging, to bring ashes on the blood, etc. And also, I would say, the passive or active participation of the neighbors, who in any case at the minimum went to watch, because it was the Einsatzgruppe did this shooting in public, and most of the time people tried to find a good place to see. So we are still working on that, but suddenly in August 14, when I heard at the TV that ISIS was climbing around Mount Sinjar, and that a population called Yazidi, I never heard about the Yazidi before, was trying to escape, and people began to say it could be a genocide. I took time to think, to pray, and finally we decided to go to Iraq. Why go to Iraq? You know, I realized it was not so far from the same methodology. It means the killers came to the village and closed the road with the neighbors, and made a false promise to the Yazidi that it will be nothing except a changement of document. So we have to gather in the administration and put a white flag and renounce to their religion, and so on and so on. And just after the doors of the administration is closed, they begin to dismantle the families. They take out the newborn babies, they will disappear, being adopted by family, ISIS family. They select the virgin girls with doctors who check every girl, and this girl will be sold with the help of the neighbors by a huge group of 100, 200, 300, and after sold one by one, and sometime until now. And the most of the men have been killed if they renounce to convert to Islam. So we decided to go, and it was a big challenge because it was quite different. First, because it's Middle East. Secondly, because the killers were still alive. And when we began in spring 15, the front was not far. We were not far from the front of ISIS, so we were highly depending on the war. And now we have filmed 380 Yazidi. We interview them just when they escape, so that we can really have a real memory, not mixed with the narrative of the camp where we are. And we try to rebuild all the topography that they had to cross from the day of arrestation to the day of liberation. And it's a big challenge, because today a girl who goes out of ISIS has been sold a minimum 25 times to sometimes to 35 times. She had a forced pregnancy, and so she had babies from ISIS men, and she cannot bring them back. And the boys who come back, it's more complicated because they have been trained in Islamic school, completely cut from their family, and in an Islamic school in Mosul most of the time for during 1 year and a half. And the best one have been chosen to be trained in camps in Syria. I remember one, he told me how after 1 month already he forgot his family, and he was very happy to be chosen to be trained in a camp. It explained it was difficult because it was underground camp to avoid the bombings. And after, he had to choose which gun he will choose, and he has chosen to be a sniper. And you know, he was 12 years old, so very proud to have been a sniper in ISIS. He has been fighting on the front against the Turkish or against Bashar al-Assad troops. So for these teenagers, it's a big challenge, because when they come back, they don't even remember the face of their parents most of the time. They don't speak any other language because it's forbidden in ISIS. And we try to heal them in centers that we have in Iraq.
So, and yeah, this is my next question would be, you said they sometimes or most often they do not understand the language anymore because they were trained to forget them, trained as terrorists and so on. So could you maybe say something about these actual, I think there are more challenges which you see when you meet these children or child survivors? And in these centers, for example, in Iraq, with which methods or approaches do you try to bring them back into a life?
Though first of all, for the children, most of them, they didn't want to come back. They wanted to stay in ISIS. I remember a young boy, he was 9 years old and he has been sold to an American family. So he was speaking perfectly American. And he told me, I'm not Yazidi, I'm not Kurdish. I don't even know what I'm doing here with these silly people. And so he accepted to make an interview. And he spoke to me about Samantha. He called her my mom, but she was ISIS. She was not her mom. And after a few minutes, he asked me, can I ask you something? I say, yes. He said, will you give me money for this interview? And I say, money for what? He told me, I need to buy a pistol to kill my dad. So his biological dad. So we realized he was really ISIS. We could identify the mother who was in jail in Syria, Samantha, because she was in a CNN emission. So we confronted with the video, etc. And the parents didn't know what to do because they couldn't even communicate with him. And now he has changed. Now he has found back his Kurdish language. He goes to school. He's happy. So what is the methodology? First is to re-socialize them. When they arrive in the camps, in the IDP camps, they don't want to communicate with the other Yazidi, so they isolate themselves. So our psychologue or the nannies go out of our centers and try to become a friend with them, to begin to re-socialize them. And so little by little, and also after to attract them in our centers, sometimes for simple things, sometimes to teach, to learn English, sometimes to play football, sometimes something easy. And little by little, all the staff, I will say, will begin to make a statement. For example, some boys, when they arrive from ISIS, they don't want to sit near girls because they say it's forbidden. Or if they see another Yazidi speaking with a girl, they say, you will not speak to you anymore, etc. So the first challenge is to reestablish the relation between men and women, I would say, and boys and girls. And secondly, second challenge is to teach them something else, like the Hadith and the Quran, because for them it was forbidden to learn anything else. So, and they cannot go back in school because they have been 5 years out of the school system, so the school system doesn't want them anymore. So we try to teach them either English, either basic knowledge of the society, also to teach them about their rights of Yazidi, their civil rights, but it takes time. Some are very happy to find back life, some don't know what to do, and also some are still in contact with ISIS by internet. So for these ones, it's the most complicated. And among the team, there is a psychologue, and so they have he works to be a friend with them, and little by little to make either session one by one, either with a group, begin to listen to the mass of trauma, because even if they have been brainwashed, sometimes they have been tortured, sometimes they have seen a lot of execution, of beheadings, of crucifixions, of bombings. Sometimes they had to escape also the bombings of the coalitions. So it goes out very slowly. And after, if they are older, we try to train them to find a job.
So he will come back. So we were just stopped when you said that you tried to find a job for them, for the kids.
Yeah, most of them, you must know that these children, they had a promotion in ISIS. For us, they are children, they are teenagers, because they are 12 years old, they are 14 years old. But in their mind, they are not. Well, one boy who has been to Canada, he said on his Facebook, he said, they built a world in Europe, teenager, but I'm not a teenager, I'm a fighter. And so there are two people in the same persons, I would say. There is a fighter who has been very successful to shoot with the Kalashnikov, to put bombs, or to be sniper, etc. And there is the child who wants to play football, who wants to meet girls, who is young. Sometimes also some have been married very young with somebody on the ground, and that they miss somewhere. They will never find back. So it's a challenge because at the legal level, they are children. And at the concrete level, they have been fighting as terrorists. And so we think also that they had a promotion in their life. They were from small village, keeping animals most of the time. And suddenly they are sniper. So it's to be somebody for a boy. And so we try to find them a promotion in Iraq. So to learn them a job. So by example, that they can practice in their village. So to be hairdresser or to be carpenter or to know to make reparation of telephone, or for the woman to know to make suits, to have her own autonomy. And we see for that a big success because suddenly they realize there are other skills. We can say also that it's never completely sure that we succeed. The Yazidi have tendency to follow somebody. And so if they never meet an ISIS man, will tell him, oh, you remember, guy, you were a sniper, or you were somebody. If he meets one guy like that, it's dangerous. But if he didn't meet anybody like that, I think they can reestablish their identity as Yazidi. Another problem also is that most of these children didn't know so much about the faith of the Yazidi. So they discovered in ISIS the prayer, and they discover the feeling of God, the knowledge of God. They know a lot of hadith. They know, for example, one girl, she was trained to sing the Quran, and we told her, can you sing? And she began to sing Quran, and somebody was Muslim, began to sing with her in our group, and she said, no, you don't know to sing well, stop singing. And it was very impressionant because she was Yazidi and she knew many pieces of the Quran by heart. And so that's another problem, is that they had a religious identity, and in the Yazidi people, it's more a reinsertion in the Yazidi people, I would say, rather than in the religion, because sometimes they don't know so much. So it's a big challenge. It's both a psychological challenge, it's both a resocialization challenge, and to open a future to them. And also for the orphans, it's terrible because nobody cares of them. They have been sold back to the family, but sometimes it's an old uncle. One guy, he was 86 and he had 6 children in charge, not his children, but he could buy back his nephews and niece. And he told me, I have not even the money to give food. So we have also to provide first level help. We make a basic distribution every month for the orphans. It's also not easy to raise money today for the Yazidi because people think it's in the past. People think it's a subject to study, but you know, it's like to study the Jews in 45. And so the first need, I would say, is really a concrete need. And so that's another problem. As long as we were in the light of the media, the Yazidi received a lot of help. Now that there are no more in the media, who cares?
Yes, but you just mentioned it. You said it's like similar to studying the Holocaust. How did that come? I mean, you said at the beginning that you watched a documentary or something like that about Yazidis, but I mean, it must be also a challenge for you to bridge the past, to work with something that happened in the past and with genocide, which is happening today.
Yes and no. Yes and no. First, we have to learn a lot of new terminology, Arab terminology,
yes.
Arab terminology of ISIS. So it's complete other category. What is helping is that we have to learn to listen and to drive question without hurting the people, because we have interviewed more than 8,000 post-Soviet citizens present at the killing, but now it's people who are now, and that the killers are not dead. So it's very, very different. And also some killers are out of the countries and succeeded to escape, and they are in contact. So there is also a risk of security. It's not bridge because it's not, you know, when you have a child 9 years old and he meets his mom and he's waiting for his mom and the mom is dead, you have to care. You cannot say, oh, I bridge you with a survivor of 45. It would be awful. And what I say is that to take care of them is like the people who had to take care of the Jews in 45 or 46. It was first need help. And I think very few people realize they have to help them now. Because as I said, you know, I am a believer. God will not ask you, did you know the Yazidi? He will say, what did you do for them? And I think we need also a wake-up call when there is a genocide or mass crimes. But after, we have to help the people because our armies don't stop the genocide, but at least with the NGOs we can heal the survivors, and it's my duty. So it's different from what I did in the Soviet Union because we have to heal actual people, and most of them children and women.
So what we were wondering also is that is it sometimes some kind of challenge or problem that maybe the children have that you are a Catholic priest, or that it's an organization which is run by someone who is Catholic because they are Yazidis or trained by the Quran and so on?
Oh, not at all, because in Kurdistan, Iraq, the priests are very respected, and my team is Yazidi. My right hand is Roma. He was a policeman in Molenbeek, so he knows ISIS on the ground of Europe. He knew Abdel Salam was one of the killers of Paris. And the other team is completely Yazidi. We have 18 employees, Yazidi to care. The nannies are Yazidis, the psychologues are Yazidi. And when we make interview, we have always minimum 2 Yazidi around the person, and me, I am in the back. And it's the opposite. As long as they see you care, as long as they say you make food distribution, as long as you pay surgeries, because a lot. For example, somebody asked me yesterday, a girl has been released by ISIS, but she doesn't listen and she doesn't hear anymore. They have destroyed that. She needs a surgery. So always the same question, how much will cost the surgery? Is it possible to reach her? Can she go to hospital? Do we have really a surgery in good capacity to do that? And we did that a lot. We had, to give you the situation, it's not at all theoretical. One boy, he was trained in a camp, but he was afraid to stay all his life. So he escaped, and he stole a bicycle and he tried to run away. But the chief of the camp, when he saw that, he took his car, he drove the car, and he ran on him 2 times, and he broke his 2 legs and 2 arms. And after, he took him to an ISIS hospital, and they put him metal in the legs and in the arms, but they told him, we will put it too small, so you will suffer a lot when you will grow. And so when we met him, he couldn't walk anymore because he was growing and the metal was blocking everything. So we had to pay a surgery to take out all the metal that ISIS put in the corpse. So people, they know we do that, and it's why it's not a problem. It's why it's very different from the Soviet Union, because we have to heal them psychologically, but also physically. We have a girl, she was under the bombing of the coalition, and we saw she had a lot of things in the corpse, and she was very painful. And so we made surgery, and she had 13 little stones in the corpse from a bombing. So we extract the stones. I say that because it's very, very, very concrete. It's not a study. It's really a physical and psychological and relational healing to engage. It's a fight. It's a fight, in fact. But this fight is very alone. We are not very numerous now to do this job.
Yeah, and I think it must be a heavy challenge to speak with the children, to work with them, that they can regain trust in life.
No, it's very difficult to find money to do it.
Yeah. Okay, yes.
That's your question is a very theoretical question. Well, actually, when people have to say it's a surgery, tell me it's $5,000. I have to find the $5,000.
Yes.
And you must know, when you are 2 feet on the ground in the mud, you are completely over questions. To heal people is like somebody working in hospital and says, is it difficult? He says, it's difficult for the sick people, not for me.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we are running out of time. I could speak for hours with you and ask you questions, but unfortunately, we have to stop now. Yes?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to speak with you. Yes?
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
So I just stopped the recording. Thank you so much. What I wanted to ask is, do you have a...
Is it okay now?
Yes, I thought I stopped the recording, but I only asked him in the end if they have a branch in Germany, but he said they don't have a branch in Germany, and repeated again that the biggest problem at the moment is that Yazidis are not on the political agenda all over the world, nowhere, and so they still and always have the problem of funding. That's what you stopped now. Yes. So we had through 3 speakers now, and now it's time for the Q&A. I think there are already some questions.
Yes. Jan, you want to take over?
Absolutely. I just had to unmute myself. Good to see all of you. Thanks for attending. Thanks, Verena, for moderating this session. We have indeed a couple of questions. Let's start us with Boaz, who asks, can we say the placement of child survivors failed more than regular placements of Christians, of other children? And I think that question is a very broad question for whoever who wants to take that question.
Yeah. Shall I start off by responding? Yeah. Well, I know I've had this discussion with Boaz before, and I don't have any hard data on placements during that time with American families, or Jewish or non-Jewish. But I will say this, that it occurred in the literature, in the Jewish Social Service Quarterly and other social work journals, occurred with surprising frequency about the number of turnovers and placements. So it seemed to be a surprise to the social workers. And I think part of the surprise was that because the Truman Directive, initially when they allowed the children to come to the United States, the preference was to go to relatives. And relatives tended to indicate, like the Schlossers who fostered Mary and others, that they really wanted to take in their relative. And, you know, it's interesting because the children, often they had never met clearly, you know, their American relatives, but they were first very close relatives, like Mary's, you know, aunt and uncle were her mother's brother and sister-in-law. So they were very close relatives. So I think that part of the surprise was because the expectations were that these were close relatives and that they were going to love and care for the children.
All right. Next question is for Mr. Yak. If he could speak a little bit more about the work that his organization does, and maybe the broader German landscape or European landscape about aid provided to non-Jewish refugee children and their motivations.
As I already wrote in the chat, this will be part of my valued colleague Nehama from Israel, Germany. We are running a lot of cooperation projects addressing refugees from the actual refugee wave housing in Germany and in Europe. So you have to stay until the last contribution tonight, because she will explain your questions.
All right. Thank you so much. So we stay put, and I would circle back to Daniela and Boaz for the next part of the adventure today.
So we go on a 10-minute break, and we meet at 7:30 Israel time in 11 minutes. Okay, so we are going to stop the speaking now. You can stay on the screen. The Zoom is still standing, and we'll start in